Welcome to Voting Rights and Accessibility Training for Self-Advocates. I'm Laura Lee Minutello. I'm the Senior Public Policy Analyst at Disability Rights Florida.
Hi, I'm James McCabe. I'm a Senior Advocate Investigator and Voting Rights Advocate with Disability Rights Florida. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
And we are very excited, and we would welcome questions throughout if you have them. But we're going to go over the topics we will cover.
Okay, the topics we're going to cover today are how and why do people vote? Having a disability doesn't prevent you from voting. Your voting rights. Having a plan to vote. Registering to vote. Transportation and voting. What to expect on election day. Accommodations when filling out your ballot. Self-advocacy. And what is self-determination? The first thing we're going to talk about today is why and how do people vote? The United States is what's called a representative democracy. This means that we vote in elections for the people who we want to make decisions for us in federal, state, and local government. You typically vote on who will become elected officials who lead parts of the government. For example, a state representative, a city council member, a member of Congress, a state governor, a mayor, and president of the United States. Voting is one of the key freedoms of American life. Many people in other parts of the world don't get to choose who they want to represent them. Voting is a way for people to make decisions about their government.
Awesome. And some other reasons why it's important to vote is simply because we're eligible, and a lot of people fought and died for our right, specifically in the United States and around the world. So it's important to vote when we have the freedom to do so. A vote is a way that people say what they want to happen in government, and so we're going to talk a little bit later about self-determination, but it's a very important principle of self-determination to say, this is the future that I see for our country, and this is how I'm casting my vote to make that happen. And so, as I said, it's important in the U.S. It's actually important in a lot of places around the world, but we are, as a representative democracy, we're one of the first, and so it's just important to remember that that's a right we have. So, does having a disability prevent you from voting? No, it doesn't prevent you from voting at all. There are only a few ways that you could be prevented from voting, and only a court can make those decisions. So if a court determines that you have a full guardianship, and so everybody, you have none of your rights, and somebody is to make those decisions for you, that's one way to lose your right to vote. However, even then, if you have a desire to vote and you're able to do so, you're able to go to the court and tell them that you want the right to vote, and there are different forms of guardianship that can allow that to happen. One being guardian advocacy, another being to just restore your right to vote. And actually at DRF we do rights registration cases, so we're happy to help. The other kind of way that you can lose your right to vote in Florida is if you are convicted criminally of a felony. You can lose it temporarily in some cases, unless you are convicted of murder or sexual offense. You can get your right to vote back. So there are very few ways which you can lose your right to vote, and nobody can tell you, even if you have a guardian, unless the guardianship order says that your right to vote is removed, nobody can tell you that you can't vote. You can vote for whoever you want to. I could vote for Mickey Mouse if I wanted to. I like Mickey. I might vote for him. So there are several laws that protect the right to vote for people with disabilities. We're just going to go over a couple of them. The first is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which all of us should know a little bit about that. It was it was passed in 1990, so we are 36 years away from the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically makes it so that polling places and the other methods to vote are accessible. Another really important law is the Help America Vote Act that was passed in 2002. And that says that you have the right to a private and independent vote, meaning nobody can tell you who to vote for, and nobody can be over your shoulder kind of being like, vote this way or vote that way. It has to be private. And you're able to have the assistant of your choice. So that means if you want your mom to help you, if you need help reading the ballot, if you want your mom to help you, they can help you. If you want a friend to help you. I know my sister has a disability as well, and she actually had her son help her go in and fill out some of the ballots. So it can be really anybody except your employer. But other than that, you can also ask your local election officials to tell you about any voting aids that they have available. So every polling place has to have what's called an accessible voting machine, and that's basically a computerized machine that has the ballot on there and that can read it to you or is easier to fill out. But they may also have other aids for you to use and other assistance. You can also ask a poll worker to assist you. And if you do that, the poll worker, they have to have 2 poll workers just to make sure that your right to vote is what you want and they're filling out the ballot the way that you want them to.
Okay, the next topic we're going to cover is having a plan to vote. Remember to register to vote, right? That's the most important thing. If you are voting by mail, request your ballot. If you are voting in person, make sure you know where to vote and how you will get to the polling place. Know your transportation options. And some additional tips for voting are register early. Make sure you're registered to vote well before the election. Know your options. Decide if you want to vote by mail, early in person, or on election day. Be prepared. Find out all you can about the candidates and the issues that matter to you. Ask for help if you need it. Never be afraid to ask for assistance. Registering to vote. You must turn 18 before the next election. You must be a citizen of the United States, and you must reside in the town or the city where you will be voting.
So I actually have something to add here too. You can actually pre-register to vote at 16. So what you would go through the registration process, either online or in person, and then your registration wouldn't take effect. You wouldn't be able to vote to 18, but you can register, and you can also be a poll worker at 16. And we always encourage people with disabilities especially to be poll workers. It's a paid opportunity, so a lot of times the supervisor of elections will ask for poll workers, and you're able to help people vote. You're able to start that at 16 if you wanted to. Hi.
Hi.
Good, how are you?
Okay, the next topic we're going to cover is the all-important registering to vote. Now, the documents that you're going to need to register are proof of age, a driver's license or a non-driver ID that is government issued, a birth certificate will work, a proof of citizenship, a passport or naturalization papers, or a proof of residency or domicile. You do not need all of these things, but you will absolutely need at least one of them to be able to legally register to vote.
And also, it's important to mention here that you probably have heard a lot about the HB 991 that was passed into law in Florida during the legislative session that some people call Florida's version of the SAVE Act, that says you need proof of citizenship. That is actually going to take effect. If it takes effect, it's in the courts right now, so we really don't know when and if that will take effect. But if it does take effect, it won't take effect before January 2027. So for these midterms that are coming up with the primary in August and the election in November, you do not need that. The proof of citizenship or for registration does not change. So we're going to talk a little bit about transportation. So there's obviously, we all have different transportation needs. I know for myself, I have a car that, somebody can drive for me, but I cannot drive myself. So a lot of people with disabilities use public transportation. You may have your own transportation. So when you're making a plan to vote, it's just really important that you consider what areas you may need help with, and if one of those is transportation, that you plan ahead. So if you need public transportation, you don't want to wait until the day you're going to vote to access that, because they likely won't get you there. Now, it is important to know that some supervisors of elections, so each county has a supervisor of elections, and they handle the elections, and they may offer specifically to people with disabilities appointments. That isn't something they have to offer, but it is something that we recommend that you call your county supervisor of election and say, hey, I have transportation challenges. Can I make an appointment? So that way you have a time to vote, and it may just make the transportation a little easier. So you've gotten to the polling place, and what do you expect? You're kind of, especially for those of you that may not have voted before and are voting for the first time, what can you expect? So you have to be registered. Florida requires you to register before an election. And there are specific deadlines to do that. And you're going to have to bring your form of ID. They're going to ask for that. The card you get, your voter registration card, is not enough. You need a form of ID with your picture and signature on it. And you're going to give your name and photo ID to a poll worker. There will be probably a check-in station where you're able to say, I'm here to vote. They'll ask you who you are. They'll get you set up with your ballot, whether you want a printed ballot or you want to use the accessible voting machine, which can read to you and provide other assistance. They'll set you up with your ballot, and then they'll kind of leave you be unless you need assistance and ask for it. You're able to fill out your ballot in private. So one of the things we see too with the accessible voting machines or with people with disabilities is sometimes they don't put you in a private area. You want to make sure that if they don't, you speak up and you say, hey, my vote can be private and independent, and I'd like to be moved. And then when you're done, you're going to be able to hand your ballot to a poll worker or put it through the machine yourself. So you have a couple of accommodations for filling out your ballot. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, you're allowed to have anybody you want assist you. There are no qualifications except that they can't be your employer, or somebody that works for your employer. So Duke and I are colleagues. I couldn't have Duke help me vote, but other than that, I could have any of you in this room if you don't work with me, which several of you do. But your family or friends. My sister has had her son help her vote. And you're also allowed to, if you make a mistake, you're allowed to have up to 3 ballots. So you can just say, hey, I made a mistake, and they'll give you another one up to 3 times. You're also allowed to bring in a sample ballot. So most of the time, supervisor of elections will send out ahead of time what the ballot is going to look like. And you can actually fill that out with your choices at home, and then bring that with you. They have to let you bring that in. So if it is you want to vote in the polling place, you don't want to vote by mail, which is also an option you have. You can sign up to vote by mail. But if it is less stressful for you to either vote by mail or to have that filled out beforehand, you can do that.
Okay, next we're going to talk about what is self-advocacy in voting. Self-advocacy is your ability to speak up for yourself. This includes communicating your needs and interests and asking for help when you need it. Self-advocacy in voting involves actively taking steps to ensure your right to votes are protected and you can participate fully in the democratic process. Here's how to effectively self-advocate when voting. Know your rights. Number 2, prepare and plan to vote. Number 3, communicate your needs. Number 4, be confident and prepared. Number 5, seek assistance if needed. Never be afraid to ask for help. And number 6, follow up. Remember, every vote counts and your participation in the electoral process is invaluable. It's your vote, your voice, your future. And these are the steps to self-advocacy in voting. Know yourself and your needs. Have clarity of purpose. If something is not clear to you, do not be afraid to ask questions. Respect and listen to others' points of view. Be direct, stating clearly, firmly, and politely what your needs are. And acknowledge your mistakes. I make mistakes every day. The good thing about making mistakes is that we learn from them. So don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about voting, but just in general as people with disabilities, you might hear this phrase, self-determination. Well, what is self-determination? And I'm going to ask, like, if anybody has, I'll actually ask a quick question. Have you heard the phrase self-determination before? Does it mean anything to you? It's okay if not, but okay. So I'll tell you what self-determination means to me as a person with a disability. So self-determination to me means that I get to choose the direction of my life. I get to make choices about my own life, and nobody is sitting there telling me, Laura, you have cerebral palsy, you have to do things this way. It's really important, and that can be in bigger things like voting. It can be in small things like, where do I want to live? Well, maybe that's not so small, but it could even be like, what food do I like? What do I want to eat for this week? A lot of times as people with disabilities, sometimes people look at us like we can't make choices. So it's really important to remember that no matter the disability that you have, you always have some self-determination. And if anybody tells you you don't, they're wrong. And advocating for yourself might not always work. Like, I might say, okay, I want to go to and live in, Hawaii. Whether I can actually make that happen with the right supports, is not, I may not be able to do that, but it's still important that I might want to live in Hawaii. I might want to win the lottery. I don't know. But it's whatever direction you want your life to take. And so what are the steps of self-determination? The first one that always sticks out to me is to assume that you can. We call that in kind of professional terms presuming competence, but really what it means is that other people assume you can, but also yourself. I know for myself, I'll just speak for myself, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but sometimes when you have a disability, you learn that you can't do something. And we kind of get that in our heads, right? And it's important when we think about self-determination to try to get that out of our heads as much as possible. So you want to understand your choices. You want to understand what you like and what you don't like. You want to understand, what do I like to wear? What do I like to do? How do I want our country to be shaped? That's what you're basically saying when you vote. It's like, I want our country to be shaped in this certain way. And it's really important to know yourself. Also, you can make one decision at a time. You don't have to make big life decisions. Even in voting, you can take one step. So let's say you've never voted before, but you want to learn about the process. So maybe you figure out where you can learn about the process, whether that is online and learning about candidates, or maybe you call up a supervisor of election and am like, hey, I'm a new voter. I've never voted before. Can I come check out the accessible voting machine, or can you walk me through the process? A lot of them will do that if they're contacted. You can always change your mind. So even, in voting, that's the perfect example. You could have it in your head that you are going to vote for Mickey Mouse, like my earlier example. And you could say, up until the time you actually cast your ballot, no, I want to vote for Minnie. Just because you have something in your head doesn't mean that your mind can't change. And that's really for anything, not just voting. It's also important to explore all options. So in voting, that's why it's important to learn about candidates or learn about things that are on the ballot. And some of that can be really hard to understand. And so that's kind of where asking for help and knowing your supports comes in. Or, are there other places that can break down those concepts and tell you what you're voting for? Because sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes even with amendments or things that are on the ballot, they're really hard to read and know what you're actually voting for. So when you explore all options, you also want to take into account who's supporting you. And then also the last kind of two things are, it's completely up to you whether you're voting or you're making other life decisions. A lot of that is completely up to you. That's what self-determination is. And then lastly, and I think probably most importantly, whether it's voting or just life, experiences are experiences. So let's say you vote once and you decide, hey, I don't want to do this way. I don't want to go to the polls. I want to do it another way. Or, hey, I don't want to vote. I'm not advocating not to vote. I think everybody should vote every chance they get. But let's say you decide, hey, I don't want to vote. It's not for me. That's your choice. So you're just having an experience. And that is the bulk of our presentation. We are happy to answer questions. We also, for those of you that may need to change your voter registration or register to vote, if that applies to you, Duke and I can help assist that. So we're happy to do that in the next few minutes. But are there any questions?
And also, just on a personal note, if you vote and maybe the candidate that you don't want to win doesn't win, or the issue that you're concerned about doesn't go the way you want it, don't let yourself get disenfranchised. I've been voting since 1978. The first 3 presidential elections I voted in, my candidate lost, but I kept coming back. So if things don't go your way the first time, it's really the most important fundamental right that you can exercise. So keep coming back. If your candidate loses, or if your issue doesn't turn out the way you want it, don't become disenfranchised. It is your most important fundamental right, so take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Every time.
Any questions?
I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
My son Alex here.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, no, come back and sit down, please. Just shaking it. I'm shaking their hands. He was too young for the last. Hey.
Hi.
This year he's 20, so he is entitled to vote. But I'm not sure if his mind is ready for it. How do we know that?
Well, I mean, my answer to that would be,
Well, nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too, would
James,
be,
nice to meet
you
you.
may not
Thank
like
you.
my
Nice to
answer
meet
to that,
you.
honestly, as a person with a disability, but I'm going to give you my honest one. When you went to vote, did anybody ask you if your mind was ready for it?
There's a difference though, because he's childlike in many ways.
I mean, again, I love to have this. I'm glad you asked this question, because lawfully there's not a difference though.
if I ask him who he wants to vote for, he's just gonna either randomly pick, or he'll pick who I tell him to pick. And I'm not looking for someone who's gonna pick the same as me just because I am his parent.
No, I 100% get that. Truthfully, though, again, like, there are probably a lot of people that randomly pick. I'm not advocating for that or not advocating for that. I do understand where you're coming from. But I would say that also, I mean, I think how you can help him too is just kind of start to, you know, so maybe, you know, if Alex, you know, decides that, you know, I want to vote, but I'm not, you know, and you together decide, like, I'm not ready, I think maybe one of the things that you could do is, like, start to talk to him about candidates, start to talk to him about what they do, like, prepare him in those little steps. Like, so, in other words, maybe you don't go to the polling place right away. Maybe you go and you talk to the supervisor of elections and, like, go through the process. And then you know, kind of break down the candidates in a way that Alex, you know, can choose what Alex wants, you know? And so just smaller steps is what I would suggest. But ultimately, and I know, like, because I know even my parents, sometimes you kind of, or like, oh, is she ready for that? Like, I say that with my heart. Like, I know where that question's coming from, and I'm so glad you asked it. But, like, yeah, he may not be ready, but, like, at some point, like, you kind of have to help him get ready, or, like, let him decide that, even if it is just randomly choosing.
Okay.
Discuss issues that are important to him, you know, and where the candidates stand on those issues.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't know what's important to him, start there. You know, and it doesn't have to be big.
Excuse me. I'm ready.
You ready?
Yes.
You ready to vote?
Yes.
All right.
All right. See?
Thanks all of you for coming.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure. Thank you all for turning out.